And also I just wanted to open today by saying, I wanted to say God bless America and God bless Irving Berlin for writing God bless America and God bless our president. I mean, it was, I'm thrilled by the result and woke up this morning so exhausted I felt like I had won Ohio. But I just feel that we're in for a good thing. I just want to tell one little quick story about voting. I voted on my street, and there's this great old coot who was one of the producers of Bewitched, and that goes back to the early 60s. And he's probably 90 now. And every election, the election place is in his house, and it's very 60s in feel. It's just when his life was at its height. And you go in and he sort of shuffles around in the bathroom, and he came outside. There was a long line of people, and he sort of went from person to person, and he said, "I just want people to know there will be no fraud here and no harassment." and then he said, "And I want everybody to put down their cell phone and talk to their neighbors." And everybody did. It was like a Frank Capra. So it was really lovely. This is my book that I am very happy to be here to talk to you about. I brought little pieces of it. And I could tell you, someone mentioned to me long ago that I should talk about the difference between writing for the screen and writing for the page. And, I'm not so sure I want to talk about that. I want to talk about the book and say something about what it's about, something about the people who are in it, and read a couple of brief passages from some of the characters. These Things Happen is a book that is set in New York City today, and is about two families who have in common a teenage boy named Wesley, who you will remember. And his mother is very happily married for the second time to his extremely lovely stepfather. And they live uptown on the east side, and his father lives with his partner in the theater district of New York. And Wesley goes to his mom and his dad, and he says, "I would like to go live with Dad now that I am, theoretically becoming a man, and get to know him as a man." And the mother, who's extremely progressive and on the cutting edge of everything and couldn't be more liberal, says, "Oh, I think that's a wonderful idea." And so he goes down and lives with his father, for the first fall semester of 10th grade. And it doesn't go so well. The father, who is he's the guy who's always sitting in I say this in one of the passages, but he's the guy Charlie Rose always calls on to be the face of everything gay. He always is winning awards for his, his social, justice reforms. He's an important person. And he's somebody who is deeply uncomfortable with himself. And Wesley has a very hard time making contact with him for some reason. They're in a cramped New York apartment, and the father just doesn't seem to want him there. And every time Wesley walks into the room, the father walks out of the room. And the kid notices this. But there's a stroke of luck, which is that the father's partner, not his husband, but his partner of 10 years, is a man named George, who we will hear a little bit from, who runs the restaurant that is in the basement of the brownstone where they live on 46th Street between 8th and 9th Avenue. And he is a former actor and chorus boy who is as authentic and as comfortable in his own skin and as present as really it's almost impossible to be. And the kid is magnetized by him. The kid gets from him what he's not getting from the father. George doesn't walk out of the room when Wesley walks in. George stays there and talks to him like he was a person. And so it becomes, I have to be very careful about how I put this. It becomes a love story between this teenage boy and this man that is not in any way sexual or in any way, what we call today inappropriate. It is just two souls who have found each other and have connected. And there's an incident, I don't want to blow the whole story because I want people to read the book, and not that there's many people here. Maybe I will blow the story a little bit. The kid has, well, I know this is going to be in my blog, I'm not going to do that. There's an incident that happens where the kid's best friend comes out in school in an assembly. And my main boy winds up defending him in a fight where they're, gay bashed and basically very, very badly hurt. And when this happens, everybody decides in the family that their worst fear might become true, that their son might be gay. This is a kid whose father is the gay exemplar. This is the kid whose mother is, on the board of this, on the board of that. She's Toni Morrison's editor. She's Jean-Paul Lahiri's editor. I mean, she is, the cream of a certain kind of sophisticated, achieving New York woman. And I set it up that way because I wanted them to think that they knew everything about everything. And they are so distressed when this happens that they decide the only way they can process it at all is to decide that George, who is the father's partner, must have been inappropriate with the boy. And this causes the shit to hit the fan in a very big way that explodes the family when the mother accuses him of it. Everybody has to reckon with the fact that they have things in them that they didn't know were there. And this is a bunch of people who think they are uniquely aware of who they are. And the book is about many things, but one of the things that I could select for tonight is to say that it's about the beliefs and the convictions that we hold in ourselves that we are not even aware that we hold until an incident comes along to reveal them to us. And sometimes the incident doesn't come, and we never have to reckon with it. But when it does come, the test is, can you survive a new reflection of yourself that may not be what you would like to look at? And, you could read the book and find out who does and who doesn't. But that's really what the crisis of it is. It's not the fact that the kid might be gay. It's not even the fact of, the accused molestation. It's what happens when who you think you are is challenged, and how do you go on from there? So I brought 3 passages. The book is told in 9 chapters from different points of first-person points of views of the characters, and I wanted to do that because that's how I felt comfortable, as a dramatist, and it's how it started. I didn't set out to write a book. I set out to. I knew there was something more in this material, and suddenly I was writing a monologue that was suddenly 5 pages long, and then suddenly I said, wow, maybe this is, I don't know what this is, but I'm just going to stick with it. And many days I didn't, and I was, scared of it. And, I wanted to write a book, my whole life. And every day that I didn't write a book, I said, why aren't you writing a book? Because I knew I had a book in me. Or I hoped I had a book in me. And this is what emerged. And I worked on it in one way or another for 25 years. It has many, many, many geneses. And as I do talks like this, I realize, oh my God, there's that too. But I think I'm going to read first something in Wesley's voice. Wesley is the main boy. It's almost impossible to write a teenage boy who is sensitive and introspective in New York City and not have him be called Salinger-esque. And at first, people have said that about this book, and at first I said, oh my God, don't say that. And then I realized that's not a bad thing. I mean, that's a great book. It's a book that I read, again, before I wrote this book because I was scared of it. I didn't want to write Holden Caulfield. And I was very surprised when I read the book how little I liked it. I read it when I was a teenager. It doesn't hold up. What holds up is, I don't hold up so well since I was a teenager, but what holds up is the power of the voice of that boy. That transcends time, but its attitude towards teenagers and adolescents I found very, very dated and a little bit creepy. So I knew what I wanted to not do. So let me give you a taste of my Wesley. This is the first chapter in the book. And this is when we meet him. And he says, a lot can happen in a day sometimes. Not every day. Some have one event, and most have none, like in our school, which is a shining jewel in the community, and everything exciting, but also, can we just say it, uneventful. But today wasn't. School's out, me and Theo are on our way to Taekwondo. He's my best friend, always has been. And boredom is what binds us, or fear of it. We don't bore each other though, and my guess is we never will. And as for his name, he got it because his mom, who's an art historian, wrote a book about the loser relatives of famous artists. Theo Van Gogh was Vincent's brother, and he knew Vincent was the brilliant, depressed one in the family and helped the world to discover his work. Personally, I hope I would do the same if I had a brother who was a tormented genius, or even a regular one, but I'm an only child. As for Theo Van Gogh, he died, crazy due to syphilis, which was quite popular at the time. I once asked my Theo if he was worried that maybe the name had a curse on it. He said he wasn't. His mom just chose it because she wanted him to sound special and vaguely European, so when the time came it might impress the admissions people at Brown. But that's still 2 years away, thank God. What matters is now, with us on this street right here. History was made, depending on how you define history. Theo was elected president of the 10th grade, swept in on a sea of change like Obama the first time. I was his campaign manager, and I'm proud to say we never went negative, although we could have against his opponent, Shannon Traub, who posted pictures of herself on Facebook giving out brownies her maid had baked to homeless guys to show her compassion. That was the first event that made today not uneventful. And as we walk, he brings up the second. Okay, he says, my speech. He means his acceptance speech given today, which included an October surprise, even though it's November. What he said was, I thank you all for this mandate, and now, in the spirit of full disclosure, I would like to state that not only am I your new president, but I am also, and as well, not to put too fine a point on it, a gay guy. And Shannon Traub, for some reason, turned to me, so are you gay too, Wesley? Are you bi? Are you anything? And I didn't know what to say. I mostly get asked, have I finished The Bluest Eye? Or am I really planning to wear that awful shirt? But to have a person probe my essence? Third event, I answered as best I could. Shannon, I said, go fuck yourself. Which is more or less where we left it. That's Wesley. We have 3 or 4 sections in the book where he speaks. I want to say a little bit about where he came from. When we were doing My So-Called Life, we used to bring in kids from high schools all the time and just put them around a table and just talk to them. And we would find the most interesting, bizarre, ideas that we never would have had on our own. And one day, this boy came in and he was, very 15 and very, very, his voice was changing. He was very gangly. And, we talked and we gave him something to read, and he was obviously had acting talent, but we didn't have a part for him. And, I went out to have a soda in the parking lot, after about half an hour just to sort of refresh myself. And he was standing there waiting for his mother to pick him up. And he was about 6'4", and weighed about 90 pounds, and was just obviously someone who had shot out in all directions. And he said, can I ask you a question? And I said, yeah, sure. He said, last week my dad told me and my mom that he was gay and he was moving out. And I said, wow. I was quite, taken, I don't want to say taken aback, but I was surprised to hear this. And he said, would you ever do a story about that? And I said, I don't know. And I went into Ed Zwick and Marshall Herskovitz and said, you're not going to believe what just happened. And they said, write him a monologue, see what happens. That was the beginning of the Wesley character. I did write a monologue, it was about a page long. He came back, we did not get a second season, so we never did that story. And it was, would have been very, very much ahead of its time. I mean, that was, 1994. And there just wasn't such a thing, but it stuck with me, obviously. And, that character wound up in various other versions of this material. I can now, a character that I love all these people in this book. There's another little passage I'm going to set it up before I read it, which is the character of George, who is Wesley's father's partner of 10 years. And George, the genesis of George was when, during the years when we were doing 30-something, it was so intense and so exhausting and so adrenalized every single minute that I would just sort of stagger home and I wouldn't even go home first. I would go to this restaurant, which, the same restaurant every night. And I would be greeted by this, very crisp, guy, probably about 35, very clean cut, in a blazer with a tie. And he'd always say, "Richard, I have a table for you." And he was always the same table. And this was a very busy place. He would lead me to the back, and he would bring me the same dinner every single night, and saw to it that I could just chill out and just blank out. He took wonderful, wonderful care of me. And this was before the days of cell phones, so I couldn't call ahead. I would just walk in, and he would just take me back there. And this went on for 4 years. And if you think 4 times a week times, let's say, 50 weeks, that's almost 1,000 meals. And towards the end of that time, I realized something that I was really, really shocked by, which was I didn't know his name. Maybe he had said it to me once, and I didn't bother paying attention to it, because all that mattered was that he was giving me something pleasant. And he was invisible. And I wrote him a letter, because this is before everything. This is before email. And I said, "Look," I said, "I just realized this." I said, "Would you let me take you out for?" This was before coffee. You didn't meet people for coffee then. I said, "Would you let me take you out for lunch?" And he said, "Sure." And we talked, and I said, "Just tell me about your life." And his life is nothing like the character of George in the book. But he had a real life, and it was very, very full and very rich. And he told me the book is set partly in a restaurant, and everything that's about the restaurant is stuff that he told me, which is sort of an insider's view of how a restaurant works. And the book is in some way a thank you to him, because I wanted to sort of take a character who nobody ever thinks is a character, who can't have any kind of specific gravity of his own, and also sort of like somebody who seems like, let's just say it, he's not feminine, but just a gay guy who you don't have to really think too hard about. A pleasant New York, easy gay guy who is not going to make too many demands on you and is going to give you the right table. And there's a lot of people like that. And I wanted to know who that guy was. And so this is George. And this is, he's lying in bed, it's the middle of the night, and he's just sort of musing. And he can't sleep because he hears Wesley pacing on the roof at 2 a.m. because Wesley has been quite troubled about something and can't get the father to pay attention to him long enough to find out what it is. But George has got his fears. He says, 2 a.m., 2 men slowly crumbling in the bed we flipped 4 times a year to extend its life. I've got my side, Kenny's got his, and from time to time we meet in the middle to do what men like that, or men like us, sometimes do. It's not always hot after 10 years, but at least it's kind. Mostly we sleep, but I can't tonight. Kenny can. The sheep he counts double as a turn-down service with chocolates on the pillow. Mine gossip and ask for the dressing on the side. Have I been in restaurant work too long? And then there's the sounds on the roof. Greetings, prophet. I played Pryor in Angels in America in my acting days. Those were the angel's words. So it's her up there, or it's Wesley, sleepless himself. Maybe he needed some air. He's packed in so tightly with us here, and we just accepted the lack of space. New York is a place where you're often too easily grateful. And now is a good time to look, but we won't. After a long time with a person in familiar rooms, the things you need, shower mats, baking soda, ants killed or a drip repaired, turn into conversation. And if you met the need, what would you talk about? Now it sounds like he's dancing. Has he ever heard of Fred Astaire? How could he have? He's 15, he's hardly heard of himself. And I've heard him up a lot. I've heard him up there a lot recently. Last night he wanted to talk to us both. Something must be up, and Kenny couldn't get home. As the straight-acting face of all things gay, Charlie Rose wanted him at the table to state that the gays will have rights, but not too fast, not too soon, Charlie. I could have sat down with Wesley, but it wouldn't have been right. He needs his dad. That's why he's here. I didn't know if I'd like that, if he'd like me. But I have found that that doesn't matter with a kid. What does is that you hurtle forward with them and wrap yourself around the endless bumpers they're crashing into in hopes that you can limit the bruises. But maybe I'm wrong. What would I know? He's not mine. That's George. And George goes through a lot in the course of the book, and is a character who goes from being invisible to being very visible, and has to reckon with that himself, has to reckon with what it is like to be noticed, because he's built a life around not being noticed in a very subtle way. And the third character is Mom. And this was a really scary and tricky character to write, because she does something that's pretty awful in the book. And I think I gave this passage, which is quite long, to 4 or 5 women I know who have teenage sons. And I said, what do you feel about this? All of them were very shaken by it. And said, it flips me out to think that I would ever do what she does, but I think that I would under that circumstance. I don't want to, give away what it is. But I want to just say a little bit about the genesis of Lola. Her name is Lola. I was at a dinner party, 15 years ago, and I was seated next to a woman from New York. This was in California. And she was in publishing. And she was this woman, basically. She was very, very, sure of herself, very striking, confident about all her opinions. I thought she was wonderful. And I was seated next to her, and then as we were standing outside, I said to her, I'd like to, could I give you a call when I'm in New York? And she said, sure. And I said, I have to tell you, I said, it's so, you very rarely meet people who seem so pulled together as you do. I mean, and not in a circusy way, but just somebody who is so aligned inside themselves and has, things so figured out. She said, well, you have no idea what I'm really like. And I said, no, I don't. And she said, I'm many different things, but together is not one of them. And I said, well, I said, so challenge her. And I said, tell me one thing about yourself that you don't feel good about. And she was not putting out egotism or, fawning or preening, which is what you often get in LA. I mean, you know that, what you get in LA. That she was not aware of herself as fabulous. She was confident. And she said, okay, she said, well, I have a teenage son. All right, ding, because Wesley already existed. And she said, and I have a number of very, very terrific gay male friends. Okay, I said, and she said, I think that I would not be completely comfortable in some part of myself with leaving him alone with them. And she said, and I've had to see that recently, and I really dislike that about myself. And I think that she had said that to me because I was a stranger. She was, in all likelihood, never going to see me again. And it was just a sort of moment to open her heart in somebody's driveway in LA. And then she drove off with her husband, and she stuck with me. And here she is, right now, you're going to hear, I mean, of course, I've invented her from a number of different angles, but that was the seed that planted who she was. And here she is. She has called a family meeting after the kid has had the shit kicked out of him. And she wants him back with her. And she is very diplomatic and very used to running meetings and very political. And she knows that it's precarious. She respects his desire for independence, but she doesn't want him there anymore. And this experiment of living is over. So she enters the scene with that in mind. And she can't tip her hand until she does tip her hat. That comes later. She says, as I said, I had Kenny, my past, to my right, and Ben, my forever, to my left. I'm parenthesized by husbands. And then there's George, of course, Kenny's partner, not my anything. And no Wesley. He went upstairs for a minute. His Facebook wall, it had to be dealt with now. It's always now. The world is suddenly filled with indispensable 15-year-olds. Enough, I say, I'm calling him. I look at my phone, which shows the battery dwindled to a stump of red. I have one call left, like a murder suspect. As I touch the numbers, a churchyard's worth of text bells ring at our table. Text. I despise that word. I am an editor. 5 of my authors have won Pulitzers, 1 the Nobel. They bring me texts, and we make them better. We wrestle with them. But now is not the time to wish the world would go backwards. As Wesley's phone rings, I whisper words to remind me who I am and will be. Louise Corman, known as Lola, loved by my husband, admired in my field. And now, suddenly, I also seem to be someone whose formerly cheerful child mumbles fine, if that, when I ask how he is, who lets me know my love and concern is a burden and a bore, who is held for observation in a hospital to make sure he has simply lost 2 teeth and not suffered any brain damage. A boy who has to check his Facebook wall before we all agree that all our lives have changed from this moment on, forever. And then there he is. He needs a haircut and shoes. He smells, too, that boy smell, like the combined scent of the insides of 76 old mismatched sneakers. Like one of those boys they find in forests in France who have been raised by bears. With us uptown, he's always clean and soapy smelling, but he's safe there, and he is going to be safe again, if I have anything to say about it, and I do. Oh yes, I do. So that's a little taste of the sound of the book, and it's this sort of chorus of voices that tell this story. They pretty much agree with each other. It's not about one. It's not Rashomon. It's not. Oh my God, totally different angle. But it's like a baton race, and they keep passing the baton of the story, and we see it. These people, I hope, multidimensionally from a lot of different points of view. We hear the mother from her, first person, but we also find out about the mother from her husband, as he looks at her, from her son, as he has to deal with her, from her ex-husband, and it's this little spinning story that I am now out on the road talking about and bringing into people's lives. What I want most for this book is that it be useful for people. I don't mean as an earnest, tract, but that they could read it and pick it up and enjoy it and say suddenly, wait a second, that was helpful. That would make me, completely happy. And I've been lucky enough in my life, in my writing life, to experience that a couple of times where people have told me, this thing did that for me. And then you think, well, that's why you do it. And to have the chance to maybe do that again with this is incredibly exciting. It's changed my life. And I don't mean it changed my life in huge but subtle ways. I was getting kind of crusty and cynical about things. And I went to graduate school for a year, to become a therapist so I could have a normal life, where I would know what I was doing at 4 and what I was doing at 5. And then I just suddenly stopped and said, I've got to write this stupid book. And I'm glad that I did. Since I've done this, I totally feel re-energized. I'm out every night. I get dressed. I take showers. I get my hair cut. And that's the thing that most writers don't do. Particularly after a certain time. So I'm grateful to all these characters for doing this for me. And I feel like I'm their ambassador. I'm the ambassador of this little country that exists inside the pages of the covers of this book. So that's basically what these things happen is, and the title has many, many ramifications. It's one thing that I didn't read that I cut that I'll just say it because George says he always has to ask people at his restaurant, did they enjoy the play after they come in, you know, after the thing. And he said, what I realized after doing this for 10 years is that most people don't really know what they really think about anything. They know what they think they're supposed to think. And he says, and you can go through your whole life like that until something comes along that shakes you out of it and you have to see how you really feel. And he says, the reason that I like New York City, he said, is because these things happen there. There's 10 twists on it, but that's my favorite one. So does anyone ask me anything about this? Yeah, hi.
So, you're so good at developing characters, so can you talk a little bit about your process, about, you know, it seems like you've been inspired by people you've met and experiences you've had, but, you know, did you talk to 15-year-old boys from Manhattan who are on Facebook all the time?
After I finished it.
Yeah, okay.
You know, I have felt, all of us who did, Marshall Herskovitz, who was the executive producer of My So-Called Life, said, as we were reading, he said, the one thing we all have in common, he's talking about all the writers and producers, is that we're all 15-year-old girls. And he meant that in the nicest way. And there's something about that age that I never shook from me, and I wasn't, you know, worried about having it seem contemporary. I wasn't worried about language. I just felt that I trusted that. And if people had said it was wildly off and seemed wildly, you know, funny, that I would have, you know, been very upset and done something about it. But nobody has said that. And you know, when I wrote this, I didn't even know how to get on Facebook, you know, or I do now, or Twitter or any of these things. I look down on them. You know, one of the things, they scared me, and I just thought, and I was able to explain, you know, oh, Facebook means that people aren't really interested in interacting. And I realized that nobody wants to hear you explain anything. You know, they just want you to do it, or show them how to do it. And so I think that I became Wesley a bit. You know, I became expert at my Facebook, you know, wall, and you know, and my Facebook friends, and you know, I tweet 20 times a day, and I like it. You know, I'm surprised. I mean, you know, I'm surprised I like it, but how I develop characters, they come from a zillion different places. He's me, he's my nephew, he's the boy who came in that day to read, he's a million things, mostly me. Mostly me. It's a part of me that has never stopped being 15. I would say that's what it is. And that's what, you know, in the TV shows we did, that's what we were always told to do. Do not look outside of yourself. Do not be a reporter. Look inside. What's happening in the world doesn't matter. What's happening in you is what matters. And that's where the characters live. It's good advice. Anyone else like to ask anything? Yeah, hi.
You mentioned that there's different incarnations. I know there is a play version of this. Are there other things as well?
Yeah, I mean, it was originally written as a movie that was going to be on HBO as a part of a cycle that I was producing that was going to be 4 stories set at different eras in the same apartment in New York City.
Oh, wow.
And mine was the one in the present day. And it was called Then Ellen DeGeneres Never Remembers Me, which is what George's complaint was.
Yeah.
That they would go to all these things, they would meet Ellen DeGeneres, and she would say, hi, who are you? And it was 20 minutes, and it didn't get made. Partly, I was thinking about this on the airplane, there was a lesbian version of it that did get made because Ellen DeGeneres lent her name to it as executive producer, which made it something that would attract an enormous amount of publicity. And Ellen DeGeneres had at that time just come out, and it was, you know, it was an incredible thing. But there was no man, there was no Neil Patrick Harris, there was no guy who would get behind it and say, I'm going to put my name on this as the executive producer and be the star that is associated with it. And, you know, anything gay was not fashionable. You know, I mean, people didn't talk about it, didn't want to know about it, didn't want to think about it. And that's why we didn't get on. They told us that. They said, you know, you got to get a guy. And I said, there are no guys. And they said, that's your problem. You know, so, but it led to this. You know, so it took many different routes. But that was the very beginning.
You ever thought of going back that direction?
I'll leave this behind. Here it is. You know? That's a long time, you know.
Yeah.
It's here it is. I'm working on another book already. Thank God.
Good.
Thank God. Thank God. But this one is. I'm sort of stunned that it's here, but that's life, you know. It's just like, you know, this book wrote me in a way. You know, I didn't really even sit down to say, I'm writing a book. You know, I just, you know, like I said before, it just suddenly was writing me. And for 3 years, I didn't know if it would kill me, you know, or what it would do to me. But then suddenly, there it was. Then the little pieces came together, and then I knew, you know, how this fit with this. And all the versions that I'd worked with on it before suddenly went out the window because I had to understand it as a piece of fiction. And as something carried not by scenes so much as tracking the inner movements of the characters' souls and selves, which was the thrill of writing it. To go really, really, moment by moment, how they were perceiving the world.
Anything else? Okay.
Thank you.
So we do have books available at the front for Richard to sign, and thank you so much for coming out to Booksmith tonight. So, thank you.
Nobody has any more questions or anything? Are you a writer?
Yeah. I go to a high school nearby. I go to SODA, School of the Arts.
You're in high school?
Yeah, I'm in the creative writing department there.
Oh.
Yeah. So I really like your reading. It was interesting.
Oh, thank you.
Very wise words that
Thank
I
you.
misread to the department.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I saw you were very responsive when your face was really, there was something happening.
Yeah, definitely. I'm gonna buy the book. So I was
Oh,
really impressed.
fantastic.
Yeah.
Fantastic. What kind of writing do you do?
I'm into playwriting, and I do write about social injustices. I'm gonna try to get more into feminism because that's something I've become more interested in. I think that needs to be talked about more that isn't really talked about.
Are you going to college?
Yes, hopefully,
Are you a San Francisco native?
yeah.
Good for you. Yeah. And what's your name?
Hosanna.
That's a great name.
Okay.
Yeah. H.O.?
Yeah.
Oh, I've never heard anybody name that before.
Yeah.
I have a friend who has 2 kids, and a recent friend, I said, what are your children's names? He said, well, my son's name's Solaris, which I'd never heard, and my daughter is Vesper. I said, those are some of the best children names I've ever heard. And Hosanna's beautiful. Was that the name that you were born with?
Yeah.
Well, you can thank your parents for that. Well, good luck.
Thank you.
And thank you so much for coming.